Okay, so how does a huge company completely change its story from, well, being scared to being a dominant player in just 2 weeks? I know, it sounds pretty much impossible, right? But that is exactly what happened with the tech giant TCS. So today, we're going to dive into the anatomy of this massive, super fast pivot, and the whole thing was uncovered just by looking at the news data. So how did we figure this out? Well, we basically used an AI platform to sift through thousands and thousands of news articles. And what that did was let us see, almost as it was happening, how the whole conversation around TCS was changing. So you got to understand, this isn't just our opinion. This is the story the data itself is telling us. All right, let's really get into it. This is the big question, right? How on earth does a company go from everyone being terrified that AI is going to destroy its business to suddenly being praised as a leader who's literally building the future of AI? And the craziest part, how do they pull that off in just 14 days? So let me paint a picture for you. We're in early February 2026, and for IT companies like TCS, things are tense. There's this cloud of anxiety hanging in the air. The main story everyone's talking about is how generative AI could just, automate their entire business model right out of existence. And you can bet the market was starting to get really, really nervous. And yeah, this headline, it just perfectly captures that feeling. We're not talking about a little bit of worry here. This is a $56 billion scare. That is a massive number. It was this huge cloud of uncertainty just parked over the entire industry, and TCS was right there, smack in the middle of the storm. And look, these worries weren't just some vague feeling. They were having real, damaging effects. You had major firms like JM Financial cutting their targets for IT stocks. The parent company, Tata, lost a ton of its market cap. Headlines were screaming about Dalal Street anxiety gripping TCS, and, of course, the general fear that AI would lead to massive job losses. The pressure was absolutely on. But then, right when all this negativity was at its peak, TCS did something interesting. They didn't just sit back and play defense. Nope. They went on the offense. And this, right here, is where the pivot starts. It all kicks off with one single, super strategic announcement that starts to change the entire game. You have to look at this timeline because the speed is just incredible. So for about 4 days, from the 12th to the 15th, it's all bad news, right? All doom and gloom. Then on February 16th, bam, they drop the news about a major partnership with AMD. And then, get this, just 3 days after that, they deliver the second, even bigger punch, a landmark deal with OpenAI. It was just this stunningly fast 1-2 combination. And this headline really shows you the strategy here. See, the AMD deal wasn't just some boring partnership. The way the news framed it was as a really aggressive, competitive move. That phrase, take on NVIDIA, is so important. All of a sudden, TCS isn't a potential victim of AI anymore. No, they're repositioning themselves as a kingmaker in the super high-stakes fight for who's going to dominate AI chips in India. So what were they actually making? Well, the project was called Helios, and you can think of it as the core hardware, like the foundational plumbing for these gigantic AI data centers. And this is the key takeaway, right? TCS is no longer just a company that uses AI. They're now a company that builds the very infrastructure that AI runs on. That's a huge shift. Okay, so if that AMD deal was the setup punch, this next move, this was the knockout. This was the one announcement that really sealed the deal and cemented the entire pivot. I mean, just take a second and look at this headline. The partner is OpenAI. Only the biggest name in the entire game. And we're not talking about some small local project here. This is about positioning India as a core node in a, get this, $500 billion global AI buildout. This is just a massive statement of world-class ambition. And just to give you a sense of this scale we're talking about, the deal starts at 100 megawatts of data center capacity. That is an insane amount of power. But here's the kicker. The plan is to scale that all the way up to 1 gigawatt. We're not talking about building a server room in the basement. This is like building a small city's worth of power infrastructure, and all of it is for AI. And this right here, this is the absolute core of the whole story. In just a handful of days, TCS completely changed who they are as a company. Think about it. They went from being a service provider that sort of works on top of the digital world to being one of the foundational builders, creating the very ground that digital world is built on. It's a fundamental change. So, okay,
We've seen these two huge strategic moves. But how did the market actually react to all this? And maybe just as important, how did TCS manage the messaging to make sure the story was heard loud and clear?
Well, the reaction was pretty much immediate and really decisive. Our analysis shows that public sentiment just flipped like a light switch from super negative to overwhelmingly positive. And this wasn't just about feelings, you could see it in the money. When the news hit, TCS's stock jumped about 2%. That's a super clear signal that investors were buying this new story. A success like this doesn't just happen by accident. It was backed by a really smart two-part communications plan. Part one was, make these huge, bold announcements about building the future of AI. But part two was just as important. They had to proactively tackle those fears about job losses and really take control of the conversation.
And here's the proof coming straight from the top. The CEO himself came out and made this really clear, direct statement, basically reassuring everyone that, no, these AI productivity gains are not going to lead to job cuts. That's a direct counterpunch to all that anxiety we saw just a week before. It really shows a company that's in complete control of its own message.
So let's just step back and look at this incredible transformation. It's like a before and after picture. Before, the story was TCS reacting to AI. The market was full of anxiety, and people were scared for their jobs. And after, the new reality they created is TCS leading the AI build-out. Investors are confident, and the company is proactively telling its own story. I mean, it's a total masterclass in corporate strategy.
But hold on, the story doesn't just end there with a happy ending. A pivot this big, a bet this huge, well, it doesn't come for free. This opens up a completely new chapter for the company, and that comes with a whole new set of challenges and risks.
Our analysis points to three really big ones. First up is just execution risk. I mean, it's one thing to announce a project like this, it's another thing entirely to actually build it on time and on budget. Second, the competition is intense. They've basically picked a fight with NVIDIA, which is one of the most powerful tech companies on the planet. And third, there's market scrutiny. You can be sure that after all this hype, investors are going to be watching their every single move, and they'll be demanding to see real results. So here's the bottom line. TCS pulled off an absolutely brilliant move, basically rewriting their own future in just 2 weeks. They've swapped the fear of being replaced by AI for the challenge of actually building AI's infrastructure. But with that huge new ambition comes a huge new level of risk. And that really leaves us with one last question to think about. Did they actually escape all that market anxiety? Or did they just trade one kind of pressure for a completely different, maybe even bigger kind?